So I'd like to welcome everybody to this really interesting discussion on communications in governance and very specifically what is the ESG PR challenge. When we started out with this topic, even I had to sort of look up, what does ESG exactly mean? I mean, it's certainly not a brain scan, which is very good to know. So I'll quickly introduce the panelists before we actually set the context for what does this mean and why are we discussing this on a Wednesday afternoon. I'd like to first introduce Sarika Naik, who is CMO with Capgemini and also heads the Diversity and Inclusion Chair. Welcome, Sarika.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Next on our panelist list is Matt Peacock, who is with Blurred UK, who's an expert in ESG. He's also former corporate affairs head at Vodafone, so he has that experience under his belt. Knows a lot about Vodafone and what happened to Vodafone in India. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Welcome.
Next up is Nitin Thakur. He's, of course, Director Communications and Branding with the Max Group. And really happy to have you on the show, Nitin. Welcome, Nitin.
Delighted to be here, Parul.
Next up is Arijit. Arijit, of course, is a very well-known former TV journalist with NDTV. In his current avatar, he's made the switch to the dark side, if I may say, and leads communication for Renew Power, which is, of course, one of the leading alternate energy firms in India. Welcome, Arijit.
Thank you, Parul. Delighted to be here.
Priya Zutshi, we have with us. She actually heads ESG communication at the Mahindra Group. Mahindra Group, as we all know, has always been extremely focused on its values and the kind of effort it puts in giving back to society. So really happy to have Priya here and hear her views going forward. Welcome, Priya.
Thank you so much, Parul.
Last but not the least, we have Girish, who's founder of On Purpose. On Purpose is only about 3 years old, but they've been doing some phenomenal work in this field, and they've actually made this conversation possible today. And I really look forward to the practitioner's view with Girish on this subject. Welcome, Girish.
Thank you, and looking forward to learning lots.
Great. So I'd also like to welcome all our participants who've taken the time out on a Wednesday afternoon. It's like midweek, and I'm sure you must be having a lot of things to do. So thank you very much for taking the time out to listen to us. We'll have a Q&A coming up in about 20-25 minutes. So feel free to message your questions or send it in the Q&A box. Raise your hand or whatever you think you need to do. You're welcome to ask the question live or just write in the question anonymously or with your name. We'll do our best to get them all answered. Thank you for joining us. First, I'd like to really set the context of what does ESG mean, because I think at least this term for me also was very new when I first heard about it. So I'd like to come to Priya first and ask her to explain to us what does ESG mean and how does it differ from CSR and pure sustainability.
Thank you, Parul. So I think this is a very important beginning to the entire conversation, because especially in India, ESG and sustainability are some, you might hear them in the same sentence a lot of times. And just to clarify, they're not the same thing. Sustainability actually covers a gamut of issues. It's a broad term which basically means doing well by doing good, while ESG is more data driven. It's environmental social governance, and it's a preferred term especially for the capital markets. ESG data is often used a lot. You'll hear this in the respect to the risk adjustment returns. You'll hear it from the basically the team that is heading the risk in your organizations. So on the CSR front, post the CSR Act, of course, we have seen how companies have taken on the CSR work, plus how it is covering the entire issues that are community driven. Basically, companies are doing a lot of CSR work which addresses communities at large, their employees also. But ESG, for that matter, you will hear that this is completely data driven. It is something that addresses the environmental factors. So you'll hear a lot of conversations happening on waste, water, and energy. It addresses the social factors. So again, in social, you will talk about how you're handling your employee safety, you're looking after your employees. A lot of conversation around diversity is included in this. And on the third leg, when we talk about governance, it's mostly to do with the compliance of the issues. So whichever basically country you're operating from, what are the rules that are applicable to you? What are the human rights issues that you're addressing in that? So this is ESG actually, and what I'm happy about is that there's a framework there which you need to adhere to. There are actually tools that can be used to determine where you are on the ESG, as far as the ESG journey is concerned. So if I have to make one major difference between ESG and sustainability, ESG has a roadmap. It is something that you can do and begin this journey with, and sustainability is actually a bigger concept. So that conversation for another day. So it would be good to look at the various ways in which actually corporates are looking at ESG factors. I hope that clarifies. Yeah.
That does explain. May I request all the participants to kindly mute themselves? And those who are not speaking as well to mute themselves. A lot of chatter is being picked up. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that explanation, Priya. I'd like to now go over to Matt to ask for his views on the same question. That how do we set the context for this discussion, given his outside-in approach, in the sense that he has the experience of the Western markets and how they look at it, and so I'd love to know your views on why it matters. Why should it matter to Indian companies?
Sure. Okay. So let me just build a little bit on what Priya said in terms of explaining what ESG is. And for those who are joining, for whom this is a new acronym, don't be ashamed. An awful lot of people don't know what ESG is. I mean, I even now, I speak to chief executives, chief financial officers of public companies who barely know what the acronym stands for. And I lecture at international business schools. And so these are the CEOs and CFOs of the future, and they don't know what it is either. So it's okay not to know what ESG is, right? Let me just build on what Priya said and just break down the three letters a little bit, because it's important to understand the component parts. So the E, environmental, splits into two. One part is climate, so climate and energy policy, and then the other part is about natural resource and ecological risk, things like pollution. Yeah, so those are the two halves of the E. The S splits down into two parts. You have internal stakeholders, so your workforce and your workplace, as Priya said, but then you also have external stakeholders, and that's predominantly about the human rights impact on communities and on wider society of a company's activities. And then the G also splits down into two parts. So you have what's called, as it were, traditional corporate governance, which is all about a public company's responsibilities to its shareholders. So shareholder rights, shareholder protections, board independence, for example. And then the other half of the G is corporate culture. It's about how the company addresses ethical risks around bribery, around corruption, around money laundering, for example. Yeah. So if you think of ESG as those 6 subcomponents all bolted together. Now, the strange thing about ESG is that whilst each of those individual parts have been around for a very, very long time, I mean, the original rules on water and on pollution go back hundreds of years. Yeah. So the individual parts of ESG are not new. What is new is the aggregation of those 6 buckets into one concept branded ESG. So why do that? Why are investors utterly focused on ESG? And I'll give you an illustration in a moment about just how focused they are on it. Well, the reason why is because in order for a company to improve its ESG performance, it has to rewire the corporate brain about risk. And that's why it matters. Just to explain what I mean by that, traditionally, the way companies look at risk is a bad thing that could happen to you from the outside world coming in over the next 1 to 3 years. So if you look at a typical public company's annual report, and broadly speaking, all of them have the same construct. In that annual report, there is a section called, in effect, a statement of principal risks and uncertainties. And it's there in the annual report. You can go and look for it. And traditionally what companies do in that statement of principal risks and uncertainties is they set out all the bad things that could happen to them over the next 1 to 3 years. And that's been the case for decades, in fact, over 100 years, going back to the earliest annual reports. What ESG does is it flips that on its head. And what companies have to do instead is they have to think about the bad things that they might do to people and planet, and over the next 5 to 10 years, a much longer time frame. And the effect of, as it were, flipping the model away from this idea that risk is something bad that happens to you in the short term, to the idea that you are the risk over the long term, completely changes how leadership teams think about risk in its totality. And what that means from an investor perspective is that companies that are serious about ESG actually have been proven to be more resilient in the face of adverse shocks like COVID than companies that aren't serious about it. And there is hard data, MSCI market data, that shows, for example, that in the first quarter of this year, companies that were rated AA or AAA ESG, so the real leaders in ESG, significantly outperformed other companies with poorer ESG ratings in terms of the impact of COVID on the bottom line. And what that has done in turn is it's basically made investors say, you know what, ESG is no longer optional. This is not CSR. This is not a sort of a little thing you do on the side to make yourself look good in the newspapers. This is actually about core management of risk for the long term for the enterprise. And if you don't take it seriously as a company, we are not going to buy your shares, or we may lend money to you, but it'll cost you much more money to raise debt than it would do if you were a AAA ESG rated business.
Thank you, Matt, for that extremely well explained recap. Thank you so much. I'd like to quickly come to Girish before I actually start the panel discussion. Girish, as a practitioner, why do you think this topic matters?
So firstly, that's a really hard act to follow. Thanks, Matt. You know, it's funny. I grew up in the Gordon Gekko greed is good era. And if you wanted to do something good for society, you joined an NGO. And I'm really glad that now we've sort of moved on from those times. And, you know, the research states that about almost 81% of millennials, you know, have started demanding that companies show public commitment to corporate governance, even to the extent of accepting a pay cut to work for a socially responsible company. So, you know, if you think about CSR and ESG as sort of extensions of a similar thought, which is you can still do good while doing well, it sort of seems like a natural progression. But if you look at the pace at which the ice caps are melting in the North and South Pole, CSR is just not enough. And ESG brings in a sense of sort of urgency around something that is very quantifiable, measurable, and criteria-led that can, I guess, put a framework around how we power the growth of the country. And sorry, sort of, you know, and now I'm sort of moving more into, you know, the narratives that we all sort of work on with our clients, which is how do you align a brand's reason to exist along with, you know, the vision for the future of the nation. And then we think about things like, you know, the ambitions that the current government has shown in wanting to attract, you know, so much more investment into the company to achieve, you know, the economic sort of muscle that we want to. Suddenly, it feels like we're going to see a big acceleration of ESG adoption in the next few years to enable that to happen, because as Matt pointed out, institutional investors are going to, you know, make ESG reporting a big criteria to invest further. So I think, you know, as a practitioner, Parul, I think it's an area that, you know, we're really looking forward to, I would definitely say learning about more, because we're not really seeing very much of it right now. But to really be able to counsel our clients in terms of their corporate reputation and how to build their brand further, I think it's an area that we would definitely sort of want to learn more quickly.
May I please request everybody who's not speaking to mute their mic? There's a lot of sound being picked up. So please, it makes it difficult for everybody else to hear. So please request everybody to do that. Thanks, Girish, for that. I'm going to quickly now, we're going to start the actual panel discussion now. This is all context setting. So I'd like to come first to Sarika. Sarika, as somebody who has a marketing role and also a diversity and inclusion role, how do you view this whole? How important is ESG for the marketing category really?
Okay, thanks, Parul, and thanks, Matt and Girish, for setting the context. Priya, thanks for helping clarify the difference, because often, even people like me who work closer, we are not fully clear about the differences between ESG, sustainability, and CSR. I would just like to, since you brought in the point on marketing, I just want to call out two key aspects. One is I'm in an IT services organization, and any large deal that we win, the client always comes down to India to have a look at the teams that they work, to look at the innovation that we work in, and we usually present that very, very happily and very, very with a lot of pomp and show. Over the last about a year for sure, there has been a stark difference in what the clients want to see. They really don't, and I lead that team as well, and we have close to about 1,800 visits a year, 1,800 visits across India. And earlier, the clients, we would show them, we are present in so many cities, we have so many employees, we have these fancy facilities. Guess what? The clients, the first thing they want to hear now is what we are doing for climate. They want to hear what we are doing as part of ESG. And that's how we've picked up, that overall words, matrices around that. At Capgemini, we have a program which is called Architects of Positive Future. And, that's where all of this kind of rolls up under that umbrella. And hence, it's not a nice thing to do. Like Matt said, it's not something that sits in some corner, some peripheral, by the way, should have a department. It is the core what the clients are asking to see, and they are making business decisions to choose their partners to give billions of dollars of revenue basis how we are treating not only the environment but all our employees as well. The second thing which I would like to call out is we hire a lot of talent in India. So close to about 25,000 is the number that we hire every single year. And when we go to campuses especially, same thing, we used to earlier talk about, hey, we are a global organization. Hey, these are the names of the clients that we work for, etc., etc. But guess what, in the survey that we have done in terms of what the students want, which kind of organizations they want to join, the first thing that is ranking the highest is what the organization is doing as part for the climate, for our sustainability, for CSR. And, it's an eye-opener for somebody like me who always believed that, in India, a global organization, a fancy package, that's the most alluring thing. It no longer is. Things have changed. Clearly, I have been there for more than 2 decades, so I need to relearn what are the priorities for, the younger generation. It's important, to add on to what Girish also mentioned, that it's no longer just the metrics and the numbers now. It is set a vision and then go after it with sustained action. Very happy to share with you that at Capgemini, we, the entire the framework, like I said, of Architects of Positive Futures is driven right from the global CEO into the India CEO and all the leadership team. And very recently, just about 2 months back, we had our CEO had announced ambition to become net zero business by 2030. And that's net zero business, Matt, it's no longer just the organization internal, but also the whole supply chain, and also to become carbon neutral no later than 2025. Now, obviously, these are bold statements. There are a whole lot of initiatives behind that. I'll be happy to, discuss them perhaps, after all the panelists have also chimed in with their views.
Thank you, Sarika. I'd definitely come back to you and ask you more about that. I'd like to take the conversation over to Nitin now. Nitin, in our pre-panel discussion chats, you mentioned about the business impact of ESG and governance, and could you set the context on that for us first?
You're on mute.
Nitin, you're muted, Nitin. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I was just following your instruction, I think, when you said whoever's not speaking, go on mute.
Yeah.
I didn't follow the second
Sure.
part, remembering that I'm speaking now.
Sure.
So thank you for the opportunity. Lovely to be here again. I think I want to start off by saying that the best chance ESG communication has of succeeding is to move from altruism to realism. And in some sense, I think both Priya and Matt enunciated that when they're talking about the difference between ESG and some of the others. Now, to position an entity as one that is committed to minimize its eco footprint, encourages workplace diversity, holds itself to high governance standards, it's a no-brainer. I don't think it would ever be a subject of deliberation in any organization, right? Everybody would say that we should do it. But I think the important thing to understand is to position oneself as such. You need to prioritize it over, say, consumer PR or policy-oriented communication or executive profiling. There's always, these are the must-to-do for a communicator in a company because there's a direct correlation that you can see with business outcomes. So I think communicators need to play the most active role in pushing the organization towards shifting focus to ESG communication. And I think the question is why. It's not just because we are in this panel which is focusing on this, therefore we're saying it's more important. And I think the answer to why is that the two components. One is that earned reputation as against paid marketing, right, is best suited for positioning the organization as responsible one. In fact, it's exactly suited for that. And I think the second most important reason is, well, because ESG communication can have the maximum value creation potential for an organization versus, let's say, a brand communication, etc. So I think a communicator has to take that stance of going to say that 40 to 60% of communication efforts should go towards, ESG communication. And well, one may argue why such a high percentage. And I think the answer is pretty clear. And I'm going to give some quick statistics. About 83% of global asset owners now do ESG based investing. The total investment that factors in ESG now tops 30 trillion. And that's grown tenfold since 2004. You take any of the large private equity firms which had more traditional methods of investing, such as KKR or TPG, they've all created, billions of dollars of ESG funds which are running successfully. And I'm not talking just impact investors here. So, this can add the maximum value or valuation rather for an organization. Now, just a quick last point on therefore how you do it within that organization as a communicator. And I think the answer is to relentlessly push for hard matrices that feed into the business model. Investors want ESG data that's standardized, that's better integrated with financial data, that's benchmarkable, etc. So, and this data can also help the ESG leaders within the organization to catalyze change. So I think what we need to do is, versus what we used to do traditionally, is we need to bring in more left brain into what's traditionally a more right brain domain. And I think today a lot of resources are available. I think some of you guys alluded to them, like this Sustainalytics, which is, I think, a Morningstar subsidiary, if I'm not wrong, that supplies widely followed ESG data. So I think that's sort of briefly my starting comments on how communication can play a role in ESG.
Thank you so much. I'm already getting in some questions, some of them quite passionate, I can see. So thank you, Nitin, for clarifying further on this issue. I'd like to go over to Priya Zuchi now, and then I'll come to Arijit, of course. Priya, as somebody who's actually, in real life, as I would say, in real life, actually implementing ESG communication, what have been your main learnings? Okay, now there's sorry, there is a request. Please, I request everybody to mute. Otherwise, I'll have to do it at my end, which I'm sort of not keen to do that. Okay. So I'm just going to unmute Priya for. Yeah. Priya, can you unmute yourself? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's unfortunately I'll have to act like a bit of a principal, and I've muted everybody now, and I'll unmute everybody when they need to speak. So Priya, to come back, I was asking you as a practitioner, what have been your major learnings in about ESG communication? If you can share some specific examples, I think it would really help our audience.
So I'll start mentioning with something that Matt mentioned earlier. It was about the risk perspective. So whenever you go actually to the business guy, it could be your CEO, your CFO, your business head. The one thing that really attracts them to the conversation is if you talk to them about their business. And in business, what I've discovered, what is very important is the risk perspective that ESG brings to the table. So when you tell horror stories, I'm sure this entire panel can tell you a lot of horror stories about even what things can go wrong when ESG is not actually done well. When you present these kind of findings to the business head, obviously they actually take you very seriously. And from a communication point of view, what I think is that it's always good to be actually come prepared to the table. So what I would suggest is that begin the conversation with the risks that are associated with it. Something that we use a lot is materiality. Materiality is basically things that are important for the business. And from that, if you start the conversation with the business head people, they tend to understand you better. And from a communication point of view, if I take these materiality issues and I put out the entire communication, entire narratives around how my company is responding to these kind of risks, that is a good beginning to have a conversation with all kind of stakeholders, whether they are your investors, whether they are actually your customers at the end of the day at large. So you'll see a lot of examples of this has happened. Even in my company, for example, in Mahindra, our entire journey on reporting, which is like essential item of ESG, started with an investor actually asking us, what is, are you reporting on the 3P? That is people, planet, and profit. And that's how our journey started on sustainability as well as ESG. Now we are at a point of time wherein actually we have integrated IRC, basically reporting framework, which means that ESG forms is a central part of our annual reports. So this actually shows the kind of conversation that's happening across. It's a beginning, of course, in that sense that even business is taking us very seriously. They want to put out things on ESG and what they have done, which is a good beginning. What I would like to actually the practitioners to look at is understand the business first, understand the risks that are associated with it, understand what is central to the business. And if you take that angle, it's easier to actually sell them. I would say sell, but it's easier to position your ESG communication.
I think that's a really valid point. These are the most interesting sound effects I've ever heard in a webinar. I have to say that. So I actually don't know where they're coming from. So thank you, Priya. Actually, that was one of the questions the participants had asked is that what kind of framework would be, what kind of framework and standards can be applied to ESG. So I think that kind of answers the question, but we'll come back to that in greater detail. I'd like to bring in Arijit. Arijit, just if you could unmute yourself. So Arijit, the kind of business that you're in, you of course mentioned that it's actually impossible to run a business of this nature without heavily looking at ESG compliance. So could you tell us a bit more about that, and how does that affect your communication plan?
Thank you, Parul. Thank you for having me on this discussion. Yes, so as Nitin said, we are some of the beneficiaries of that funding, which is going into ESG compliant companies. Renewable energy, of course, is driving that. So as you said correctly, it is internally it is pretty easy for us in terms of the fact that Renew Power alone actually is mitigating almost 0.5% of all of India's carbon emission. So just because of the operations that we do, the way we are able to generate power through solar and renewable energy. So what it does that at least the E is sort of taken care of, in terms of the fact that it's clean energy. And as Sarika mentioned, we looking at becoming a carbon neutral company or a zero carbon company is something which is comparatively easier for us to achieve compared to many of the other sectors, specifically companies operating in, let's say, a hard to abate sector. So that is something which is difficult for them. So therefore, for us, obviously, the challenge for companies like ours, is basically not only communicating internally or convincing your own management, because they are already convinced, they are in that space there. What becomes very relevant for us is basically to evangelize this, to talk to other people in the sector, and to explain to them, how this is the path that everybody needs to move on to, because climate change is something which is real, which is not something which is very far away. We have only one planet. So to be ESG compliant, to look at that very carefully is something which becomes a very important part of our communication strategy. Whenever we are communicating, it is important for us to tell people on how to look at these aspects very clearly. But that doesn't mean that for us also there are no challenges. So for example, diversity. So if you look at the renewable energy sector, it becomes climate change has a very big impact on women. But how many women are there actually in the power sector? Means, is there enough diversity there? So that is a huge challenge for us, means to get women to move in so that they are better able to understand the sort of impact that is having. So that becomes another communication goal, for a company like ours. Then obviously, because we are putting up projects on ground, biodiversity, protection of wildlife, protection of habitats and livelihoods, and basically looking at communities around our sites. So those again become sort of important challenges in terms of communicating. Then obviously convincing the government, telling the government that look at ESG compliant companies, means it is cheaper for you to buy power from somebody who's actually not destroying the environment. So that again becomes an important tool of communication. So I think these are some of the very important aspects that, as communicators, we need to look to, because we sort of carry that responsibility of, talking about the benefits of ESG to others as well, apart from, other than from doing it internally.
So thank you so much, Arijit. I'd like to now throw in a series of questions to the entire panel, and we'll decide as per the question who would take up what. So my first question is, I think Priya had mentioned that the one big difference with ESG is that there is a roadmap and there are specific steps you can take to implement ESG. I would be very interested in knowing what is the mandatory framework for that in India and internationally. So I would like Matt to definitely come in on this question. So Priya, would you like to take that, or Nitin, would both of you like to address that?
I'll make an attempt first.
Sure, Priya.
So basically what is mandated currently is, of course, the BRR, that's the Business Responsibility Report, which needs to go into every annual report. So that's a mandated form. As far as India is concerned, I'm just taking it from the country's perspective. The second thing that you can do is, of course, external disclosures. So companies actually look forward to these external disclosures as ways of showcasing their work that they're doing on ESG. So we have 2-3. DJSI is a very well-known framework. Sustainalytics is another one that was spoken about earlier. So these are the external frameworks that one can refer to. These are things that you can actually look at, and you can send in your entries, and they can evaluate where you are on this journey, and they can give you guidance on where you should be. In the sense, what are the ways forward for it. One more framework that we have in place is the GRI framework. So this is the global initiative, actually reporting initiative framework, which is again, this is completely voluntary, that a lot of companies in India are doing currently. And it's a very comprehensive framework which covers all the factors that are listed in ESG and much more than that. So these are laid down frameworks that one can refer to in the journey. I would suggest that to begin with, if we do a very good job of your BRR, which is basically part of compliance module now, this could be a good beginning actually for any company.
So do they fall into under the Companies Act?
The BRR does. The BRR does, which is part of the annual report. But the rest of them are voluntary, completely voluntary frameworks.
That's good to know. I'd like to bring in Nitin now. Nitin, and an additional question for you. What kind of, apart from, what are the mandatory requirements that you look at Max Group, and what is the board's reaction to these requirements and the communication of these requirements?
I think we have to put some of the others on mute. I hear a lot of background noise. Okay. So, before I answer that specifically, I think you addressed the last question to me as well on how do Indian companies fare, and, what are some of the frameworks that are possible. Priya spoke about some of the frameworks. And I think Indian companies, at least the large ones, are not doing that badly. In fact, today morning itself, I was browsing through the latest report that Refinitive's come out with on ESG. It actually covers 9,000 companies across the globe, and which sort of account for 80% of the global market capitalization. And it has 160 Indian companies, large Indian companies in it as well, which form a part of the MSCI index that Matt was referring to earlier. And some of these companies are actually, let me call out some of the areas that we're doing quite well. One of them is on CSR and sustainability reports, where we have 84% of the companies doing it, as against, the global reference point of 58%. And one of the reasons, of course, could be because BRR is now mandatory for the listed companies. 94% of these companies in India have a business ethics policy, as against a global average of 79%. And very quickly, policy on bribery and corruption, again, 81% of the companies are following that, as against 76. And of course, there are areas of improvement, and the biggest one that stands out is having ESG as a matrix as a part of executive compensation. In India fares one most poorly on that. Just 8% of exec compensation is associated with it. So obviously, as we go down the ladder, therefore, following of this matrix would reduce. But all in all, actually, India is not such a bad place, at least the larger Indian corporations.
Thank you, Nitin. I'd like to come to Matt for perspective, especially from an international point of view. In your opinion, and of course, I understand that you may not have done a full study of the Indian market, but what additional frameworks or matrices do you think could apply to India, which could be useful for companies here?
Okay, well, let me just make 2 points. First, let me talk about international benchmarks and where we're at globally on measuring ESG performance. And then I want to make a specific point about the Indian context from an international investor and an international market perspective. So in terms of frameworks, to be candid, the ESG world is a bit of a mess, is the truth, okay? So if you're an international investor and you want to compare one company's ESG performance against another company's ESG performance in the same way that you compare financial performance between different companies, actually, it's really difficult to do that. And it's difficult to do that because there is as yet no single established taxonomy for ESG metrics. So what we have is the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative that Priya mentioned earlier. It's 20 years old. It's not bad. It's quite good on the E, on environmental and climate factors. It's not very good on S factors, and it's pretty weak on the G factors. It's deeply imperfect in reality. it was good at the time, but it's kind of the world has moved on. What's happening now is that the biggest institutional investors in the world, and also many of the independent ESG ratings agencies, are standardizing on something called the materiality map that's created by a body called the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB for short. And one of the beauties of Zoom is I can put the link to the map in the chat, which I am now doing. So if you look in the chat, I've sent the link to everyone. And if you do nothing else after this webinar, I strongly suggest you click on that link, have a look at the sector that you work in or that your clients work in. And it is an absolutely brilliant tool for explaining the areas of ESG risk that you have to think about. That SASB materiality map directly informs the BlackRock ESG process, Fidelity, Legal and General. It informs the thinking in the big private equity firms like Blackstone. It's becoming the shorthand version of how the major international institutional investors and others like them think about ESG risk. Now, unfortunately, what that doesn't give you is a standardized global reporting metric that enables comparability between different companies. The big change that's about to happen that will clear this up, I think, is the European Commission. So the European Commission, under the Sustainable Finance Action Plan, is creating a standardized European taxonomy for all ESG factors. And when that taxonomy is finally created and implemented, it will be a legal requirement across the whole of the European Union that every single investment decision, all investment products and all investment advice take full account of all the different factors in the taxonomy. That will mean that companies adopt that taxonomy. And if all of the major companies in Europe and also the UK, forget Brexit in this context, the UK will adopt it, that will become the de facto global standard, and it will apply in India within the next 5 years. Okay, so that's the benchmarks. Let me just quickly talk about India and ESG from an international perspective. So very broadly, and this is a bit of a sweeping statement, but it's based on the conversations that I have with institutional investors and in the international ESG community. India is seen as, Indian businesses are seen as very alive to the E risks. Yeah, so companies like Arijit are absolutely the heroes here because they are leading the revolution around climate change in India. And there is very, very strong evidence that Indian companies absolutely understand climate risk, because in India, climate risk is material risk for all kinds of companies, and are doing something about it. Where it sort of weakens is when you get into the S and then when you get into the G. So there is, I don't have to tell you this, you know this, but I've been working in India off and on since 1990. I know India about as well as any place I've ever worked in. There are significant societal challenges for many, many businesses in India, from workplace safety through to local community fence line issues, as they're called in the oil and gas industry, where you have human rights issues for the people living adjacent to a factory or a plant. And then I'm afraid we come to the G. And corporate culture and bribery and corruption. We cannot get away from the fact that under the Transparency International league tables, India is ranked 80th in the world for corruption. To put that in context, that is behind Belarus. That is behind Saudi Arabia. Yeah. So the international perceptions around ESG risk doing business in India is, as there is a significant concern around corruption. There is a significant concern, and I have to say this as an ex-Vodafone person, around transparency in the taxation system, which is an ESG factor, by the way. Taxation is part of the G. And these things are an overhang in terms of how international institutions and international investors look at Indian businesses and how Indian businesses report on ESG risk.
Thank you, Matt. I'm afraid I'll have to go into questions now because we're starting to get a lot of questions now. So one final question to Sarika before I throw it open to the audience. Sarika, you've recently launched a purpose statement, in fact, as recently as last night. Could you tell us why you felt it was, why did the company feel that was required as a separate mission statement?
So a purpose statement is not really a marketing, statement. It's a statement of the reason for existence of the organization. And, actually, all the panelists have been, articulating this, that, something as important as ESG should be at the core or the purpose why an organization exists. I think that was the initial thought. And, we also felt at Capgemini that it's important that we keep this at the core of all that we do. So you're right, we've just launched the the purpose statement, and I'll read it out for you. It is unleashing the human energy through technology for an inclusive and a sustainable future. I just want to draw your attention to two key words, which is inclusive and sustainable future. And no longer are organizations like ours going to be talking about profits alone. So we are a technology organization, so obviously we have to bring in the technology. But all organizations, of all the panelists who are here, plus all those who are on, listening in, I think this fact that it has to be inclusive, it has to be a sustainable future is going to be the core. And that's perhaps going to, like you said, organizations who have ESG at the core are more resilient during COVID. I think it's true not only for COVID, but even in the long term, for survival, really.